Hey, you're watching Just Press Record on the Cultish Creative YouTube channel. I'm your host, Matt Ziegler, and on each episode, I invite not one, but two guests to join me for a conversation-style interview. These are smart, funny, usually a little eccentric, frequently a little weird, often very online friends of mine. And even if you don't understand what they have in common at first, just wait, because I've seen some common ground between them that I've been dying to ask them about, and just press record. The show practically named itself, seriously. So subscribe, like, comment below, and stick around at the end of the disclosures, disclaimers, and reminders. And, come find me, cultishcreative.com, at cultishcreative on Twitter, and by name on LinkedIn. Without further ado, throw your seatbelts on. Let's make it a record. Okay, I am pressing record now. This is a special conversation that we said we had to press record on. I'm Matt Ziegler, joined today by Jess Bost and Tom Morgan. Say hello, you beautiful people, you.
Oh.
Just to be with you guys.
All right, so unstructured conversation, but a really important one. We collectively got into this back and forth over this Robin Arzon interview with Adam Grant. And I've already said before this, if I'm mispronouncing Robin's name, she's going to hunt me down, and she's already faster and stronger than me. So I fear for that with my life, but I accept this role as hosting this conversation. The back and forth that we had, and why we said we got to add this conversation and we should press record on it, is over this concept she introduces to Adam Grant. I don't think he's going to fight me, that whole give or taker thing. I might have an upper hand on that one. Best self versus favorite self. And maybe at its highest level, just start me with this. Explain your interpretation of Robin Arzon's statement about what is a best self versus a favorite self, and why does it matter?
Yeah. Thanks for that. And thanks for the invite to be here. And so this really struck me. I was on a walk listening to this podcast. It was recommended to me by another advisor out in the universe, Josh Turner. So thank you, Josh, for turning me onto this podcast. But as they're dialoguing, she brings up this idea of best self versus favorite self, and describes it as though the best self is like what society expects of you, and kind of how you've warranted society's expectations on yourself, and like the cultural norms, the opinions of others. It's this version of ourselves that we think is we need to be in order to be more successful, in order to be more attractive or more likable. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because it is truly how I've oriented my life for the majority of my life, is trying to be this best version of Jess. And then she put that, just starkly against this other idea of being your favorite self, which is the version of ourselves that we enjoy being the most. And it doesn't have to stand completely in opposition to what society thinks we should be, but the seeking of it, I think, was the idea behind it that really resonated with me. This idea that we can seek after the version of ourselves that would make us feel most fulfilled, the version of ourselves that is most authentic, the version of ourselves that is happiest, and to really seek after that as most important, versus seeking after this idea of what society tells us we should be as most important.
Okay, so Tom, it's a really important part of this, and I don't know if you know this part of the story. Robin had something very interesting, and I say this in a loving and kind way. She had something very interesting happen to her well before she had this realization.
Yeah.
Working as a lawyer, she gets held up at gunpoint. Traumatizing event. Tom, comment on how can trauma be transformative? We're going to wrap this back into that point that Jess just made. How can trauma be transformative?
There's still a fine line that the definition of hell is on the day you die, you meet the person you could have become if you'd been trying hard. It's awful, isn't it? Awful. And there's the cliche about like, live every day if it were your last, and what would you be if you really put effort into it? And maybe trauma and the experience of like, wow, like I've been going the wrong way all my whole life can be that pivot moment for you. But I'm not sure you can have that pivot moment by reading about it from other people, because then it just becomes another stick to beat yourself with. Nobody actually lives their life as if it was their last. And I think that that can be another form of pressure, that, my God, I'm not maximizing. And then you fall back into the life hacker productivity trap. And so I'd reflect that maybe a traumatic pivot event is more worthwhile if it teaches you how to let go. That basically, oh my God, I can die tomorrow. So like, I should find something I can fall into that's really light for me, that's really easy for me, because I don't know when I'm going. So rather than kind of milking every day for what it is, it's just learning to be at ease with what it is.
How do you reconcile that, Jess, between like the society expectation of what is at ease, and then your own enjoyment of what's at ease? Can you reconcile those two for yourself?
Oh, for myself. Yeah, another podcast, I think, that was also touched on this subject a little bit, that Dr. Huberman did, interviewed his guest about the idea of different selves within us, and how there are many selves at war. And the description that he was given was in speaking with someone who was trying to be their most authentic self. And they were saying, well, the reason that I am being so straightforward about this, maybe even cruel about this is how I authentically, it was what I authentically believe about this. And so I need to tell you my truth, kind of a presentation, which we've heard before. And he was reflecting back on that and saying, well, there are many versions of self, right? There are many versions of you. So which one of those are you being at this moment? And is that one the one that you want to be in this moment? Can you is this the one that you want to present yourself as in this moment? And to bring it home to an analogy for me specifically, my 16-year-old is something that comes up very often in conversation, because I'm learning a lot about myself just through learning how to parent her in a way that brings out the best in her. But as I'm going into these moments with her where there's a lot of friction, I have the choice to be either the parent that is loving and kind and considerate of where she could be, and also the parent who really wants to hold a strict boundary over something that matters to me. And a lot of times those two are at war. And so I have to decide which one of those parents I want to show up as in that moment, and which one of those parents is the one that she might need in order to successfully bridge the gap between where she is and where, we've talked about she wants to be next. And so it's a lot of back and forth movements, but essentially it doesn't mean that there's only one version of me that only that version can dominate my actions. It's a choice of which one inside of me do I feel best fully helps me and the person that I'm working with at that time make it to the next step.
It's so interesting when you have this encompassing view of all these selves, and part of me wants to push back on the war aspect of it, the warring selves. Another part of me just wants to say there's middle school lunchroom dynamics at play in all these selves. Tom, you've actually written and thought a lot about all these different selves and how they act out into different future combinations. Any comment on just that we contain multitudes?
The first thing is to be a little patient with yourself in terms of stages of life. I'm a big Joseph Campbell fan. He's like, first you go and learn the rules, and then you can break the rules, and then you can follow your bliss, right? Is that the 20s and 30s for most of us, I think, is erecting that persona and learning a set of skills and having a strong container that then we can fill it with the person that we want to become. I think you really very rarely meet a person that from like 12 or 13 has a clear enough view into what they're going to become that they can start manifesting their potential from day one. And I think that in terms of the eternal family systems way to look at this, Matt, the way I think about it is that that ego building process gives you a set of skills. But around about midlife, you may be finding that those skills haven't been deployed towards something you find meaningful. So then you invert them. You're like, my ego's got all this stuff and it's in control. It's in charge, right? My persona's in charge, but I feel dead inside because I'm not actually deploying that towards anything I feel strongly about. And then it's not an easy process of inverting it or even finding what it is to invert it. But like, I went through it. I used to sell equity research, which required a lot of pattern recognition, good communication skills, being able to get a lot of information across quickly. And eventually I stopped caring about equity research at all. But now hopefully I use those skills to communicate things I really, really care about to people that also really care about them. So I had this part of my character, which was this very abstracted intellect. And now I've deployed it in service of something which I think serves my whole as well as everyone outside of me a little bit better.
Okay, Jess, at 16, and we are not going to psychoanalyze 16, but
please no.
Yes, for all mercy's sake.
Entirely different rabbit trail.
We can't. We won't press record on that one. We're here for you on it. At 16, and I'm thinking specifically, and I think Tom, you said it earlier, something about the stick to beat yourself with. And I'm thinking about the trauma, but I'm thinking about the self-actualization that comes through these processes and the society expectations of what you'll let be shown onto you versus the personal favorite things. You get a lot of pleasure from exercising, from lifting heavy things.
Yeah.
Did you have that at 16? When did that come out of you?
To Tom's point, it was in there, right? It
Where?
was right? I was an athlete. I've been an athlete my entire life. Some of it at 16 was the fact that, ladies teams didn't spend a lot of time in the weight room, right? It just wasn't our native facility for training, whereas the football team was in there every day for hours. And so those societal messages of you don't need to lift in order to be a good athlete was an embedded idea for me that I never teased out along the way. I just accepted. And so at 28, when I started CrossFit and somebody handed me a barbell, it was almost like, wait, this is important now. And so you have to acclimate to the idea that this is an important part of being strong and healthy. And then along that way, realized, wow, I really love this. And so some of the reflection that I've done along the way over the last 12, 13 years since that moment that someone put a barbell in my hands was, how can I translate this down to a younger person? And so now my 16-year-old does lift. And she's actually very strong, can deadlift over 200 pounds as a 16-year-old, clean 150. So she's amazing. And it's something that she's had as a gift now that I didn't have. So, all those kind of reiterations, reworkings, it was something that was always there as a piece of passion for me that eventually got tapped into. And to Tom's point, like that is the life cycle of being human, right? Is an introduction to something, a opportunity, a new way of looking at things. Does that resonate with something that was already there inside of you? How can I turn that into something that is meaningful for me? I continue to look at that at my 16-year-old now and have that same hope that I hold out for her as well, even though, she may not be passing math right now. It doesn't mean that she's never going to be a mathematician. It's always, I'm back to that same word, it's always at war, as to what is happening and what could happen and what potential versus where will we go with this?
Tom, talk about choosing stress. So as opposed to the traumatic event, and maybe balance these two, the traumatic event choosing you versus you choosing the stress that helps you establish what you enjoy being the most.
As Jess was talking, I was thinking about this random idea that I've always had from Carl Jung, which is it's your future self that calls you. So we talk about having had these passions latent within ourselves. I did Brazilian jiu-jitsu for about 6 months and then eventually just went out of depression and cowardice. And I walked past the gym every day for 4 years, pretty much, because there's 2 blocks from my house. And every time I walked past it, it was like, go back, go back, go back, go back. That voice in your head, just go back, go back, go back, go back. It took me 4 years. I went back and I've now been at it for 2.5 years. And much like CrossFitters, you can tell jiu-jitsu guys because they'll tell you within the first 30 seconds that they're into jiu-jitsu, even if you didn't ask them any questions about it, because it's like utterly euphoric. And I'm not sure I ever had that in me. I genuinely am not. I've never been like an aggressive guy, a combat guy, very, very poorly coordinated. So I've always wondered whether it's something inside of me that's from the future that is pulling me forwards towards a version of myself that I want to become, which I know violates all the way we think about time and space. But it for me as a conceptualization, it's like we're flows. We're always flowing in a certain destination, right? And we're not always this unfolding necessarily. And as a result, we have permission to change. And we don't always have to look backwards to be like, was this something I enjoyed as a child? It's like, no, this is something that we might enjoy being in future. Like a future variant of me is really going to enjoy being a black belt of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And maybe that is like an attractor calling me from the future.
How do you say more about this for a second though? The choosing of the resistance. So you're walking past this place. It's saying, go back, go back, go back, go back, go back. And eventually you go back. Eventually you make the choice to sign up for a class again and do that. That's a very present decision, even if you're being pulled from the future. How do you think about the choosing of accepting resistance?
One of my more insightful friends told me a few years ago when he was listening to one of the more popular life hackers podcasts with me. He was like, there's a thin line between self-help and self-violence. And I think you can actually tell when you're going about self-violence because it's coming from a grindy place. It's coming from a place where you're not enough, but if you do a bit more, you might get better. And the other side is like a challenge that it's intrinsically enjoyable. It might not be intrinsically enjoyable at the start, but you can see how it would be. It was always that way with jiu-jitsu. Like I was just like, I can see how this will be entertaining when I get good at it, and I'll let you know when I do. I think it feels qualitatively different, and I think it comes from a different part of us. And I think there's actually a really small number of things for most people. Like I think we spread ourselves too thinly in terms of the things we can be passionate about. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a lot of passions, but I think if like I'm not a meditation guy, maybe I will be a meditation guy, but telling people you're not a meditation guy is like, it's like a heresy. Like, you're like, what, you don't meditate for 20 minutes every day? What, you don't want to be enlightened?
You don't even ice bath? Come on.
I'm into it, right? Like it didn't stick with me. And like, I've now got like a much smaller group of things that stick with me. They're all kind of maybe like of that genre, but they're not as effortful for me. Or if they are effortful, they're there in a very intrinsically enjoyable way rather than like self-hacking.
Jess is and the war raging internal inside of you.
Yes, always.
Yeah.
Thanks for telling everybody that. Yes.
Yeah. Again, I've already disclosed I have a middle school cafeteria. A war in the truest Braveheart sense is probably a lot better. Do you feel like you've narrowed down, and for yourself, like in this evolution of choosing the bar with the weights on it, like, are you consciously narrowing the pack of soldiers on the field to help you focus in on this thing that is less society telling you who has to be on that field and more Jess marshaling, Jess bravehearting those people out into position?
I think the question here is, when we frame this, you can tell me whether this is the wavelength you're on as well, is have I come to terms with my own identity of myself, right?
Current identity with yourself.
Current identity.
We're going to give you the pass on current. Yeah.
Yes. Because that to me is the strongest pull, as Tom's talking about, like the strongest center of gravity that pulls in all the things that do make sense and repels all the things that don't make sense to who I am today, currently, as a person. And so the sifting becomes a lot easier between meditation isn't for me, but these other things are for me if I know who I am and I like who I am and I'm good with who I am and I trust who I am. And so that piece of confidence, I think, that comes through knowing myself and knowing I am good with a barbell. I am capable of parenting the 16-year-old. I am. This thing helps repel the messages that don't belong, or that wouldn't fit, or that wouldn't be helpful toward that narrative. And so there's yes, I think that's essential to this process, is to center and be good with and get tight on the identity of myself. And also at the same time, and here's the hard part, stay flexible, that could change. And that, there might be another thing that gets introduced that is a little foreign, that doesn't necessarily seem like it fits or attracts immediately, but could be, to Tom's point, the future me saying, oh, make space for this. And so I'll give you one example of that lately has been, on the same topic, the same thread of fitness, is I was finding in the CrossFit gym that after a workout, I just was not recovering, and I have that Whoop band or other fitness trackers that tell me like, hey, you're like, the next day, my recovery was in the tank, and so red. It was pretty much everything I was getting after each workout. I've had to make a lot of shifts. So I don't lift as heavy anymore. I don't do as intense workouts anymore. It took me 3 months to come to terms with the fact that I am a moderately slow walker right now, with some low intensity, low weight intervals for strength training. Like, it is not at all what it used to be. Am I still a fit person? Am I still a healthy person? Am I still chasing fitness? Absolutely. In a totally different medium? Yes. Was that difficult to embrace? Oh, incredibly difficult to embrace. But am I still a fit and healthy, somebody who is interested in being fit and healthy? Yes. So that part of me, that kind of magnet, that who I am, that identity as a person who is fitness oriented, stayed. But the medium for which I achieved that has shifted. And that piece of the journey is something that takes an incredible amount of resilience with your identity, and knowing who you are and knowing how to continue to find that path toward that aspect of your life that's important to you.
Tom, jump in. I know you want to say something about that.
There's this metaphor I like of a bacterium in a sugar solution. And the goal of any organism apparently is to get as tightly correlated with its environment as possible. So you have this bacterium in the sugar solution, and it's just swimming towards where all the sugar is, right? Because the bacteria that swims away from the sugar gets selected against the bacteria that just stays where it is gets selected against. So I often see life as this process of just getting increasingly sensitive to where the sugar is and navigating yourself towards it, which means that you end up just being really efficient with where you point yourself and how much effort you put into things. So as you get older, you just pay attention to less and less things while being like exquisitely attentive to the world around you for that sugar. So you know what the sugar tastes like, you know how to orient to it. So it's not like you're losing egoic power. You're just getting really, really good at deploying that power. And so your life, to your point, just gets narrower and narrower and narrower, but in a really satisfying way, where your interests are narrowing, but you're not getting less open to the world, which sounds a bit like a paradox, but I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically on this, because you've written about this too, those transitions can take time. There can be a lot of time for those explorations of selves and to figure out who's coming out in the lead. Do you know any of that research off the top of your head, or do you remember some of the stuff you said about how long these transitions can take?
3 years is typically how long it takes a career transition. That's how many Urubara's work in working identity, which if you're thinking about a career transition, that's the best I've read. It's deeply practical, unlike all the philosophical nonsense I write about. But I think part of it is, for a lot of men in particular, there's this line from Brene Brown, which is your armor is preventing you from growing into your gifts. It's that the persona is an obstruction and has to be dissolved. And once it's dissolved, you can be open to the world and be better at taking those cues. But that dissolution process is super, 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 super unpleasant because the ego and the persona holds on for dear life because it feels like a death, even though it's a real.
Jess, and I'm very curious to hear this from, I guess, I'm going to say like a female perspective in the sense of the societal armor that you put on. And I remember this. I remember I was not a weight room kid. I had to go in the weight room for certain things in high school, like soccer and stuff like that. I have zero recollection of ever seeing a girl in my high school weight room in the 90s. Ever. Like that was like, it might have well been like the men's weight room. And when you said this earlier, it really made me think that the armor as a limiter at the societal level and at the personal level, how'd you wrestle with that?
Specifically with weight training?
Start with weight training. You take it wherever you want.
Sure. Okay. I'll reframe that into something that I've seen in my 11-year-old. So I have two girls, 16 and 11. The 16-year-old is fully challenging. 11-year-old is not there yet. And
fully challenging to you.
Fully challenging to me, fully challenging the world, fully challenging. Just is she's in that I am going to wrestle the world as if it were an alligator, and my arms. So she's just taking it all on. And sidebar, I mean, she's incredibly gifted and curious and all of the wonderful things. It is difficult to parent a child like that. In all the ways that it possibly could be. So 11-year-old is just not quite there yet. And so there's a lot of other things that I get to watch in her that are amusing and still at this point in time wonderful. One of the things that I've noticed recently is, so she's grown up in the gym her entire life. I've been doing CrossFit now almost 13 years. She's 11. She's been in the gym her entire life. Anytime she goes in there, whether it's for fun, whether it's with me just to hang out because I'm coaching, whether it's a competition, which she's done, she will sign up for a competition the day before, show up and win as if she has been doing, even if she's been out of the gym doing other things. Right now she's playing volleyball. She will show up, win, tell you when she's going in that she's there to beat all the boys. That's her entire motivation. Stand on top of the podium, gloat about the fact that she beat all of the boys, and walk away fully in charge, fully aware, fully in tune with the fact that she is just great at CrossFit. Whether she is or not, she's just, her persona, her ego, her identity about it is, this is the place that I own. I own this gym. She walks in like she owns it. She gets the things that she needs. She sets herself up. She's owning the space. So interesting. She started volleyball this past year. Brand new to the sport. I've never been in volleyball. I don't have any context or any guidance I can give her there. She looks like an absolute fish out of water in the gym. She does not own the space. She has so little confidence. The way that she even shows up on the court, the way that I watch her move her body around in space looks like somebody gave her a mermaid tail and she's just trying to figure all this world out without legs. Like
wrestling mermaids, very different than wrestling crocodiles, I've been told. Yeah.
She is, I mean, it's just so interesting to watch. And I have realized that for her, this non-native space, this new space, this completely foreign space for her has completely shifted her idea of whether or not she can be good in it. we've come a long way over the past, I would say 6 months of practices and games and competitions, um, to where she's a lot more comfortable now. But it is just so interesting to me, the difference between a place that she grew up in, a place that feels so familiar. The context for her is as if it were almost a second home, versus this place where she is equally capable. She is still as strong. She is still as mobile. She is still as athletic on the volleyball court as she is in a CrossFit gym, but she does not know it for herself. And to me, that journey of her figuring out that she can be has taken a lot longer than I expected it to. And I think like that can be just mapped over to how I have felt as a woman in this space. And we'll call it financial services. Like, it's new to me. I didn't start it until I was 34. I started CrossFit at 28, so it took me a while in that same space. I've told people, like, teaching people how to do a muscle up before I could do a muscle up felt incredibly challenging at first. But even now, if I can't string together muscle ups, I don't have a problem teaching them that, because I've had some time under tension with that, put the reps in of coaching. I felt the same way in financial services coming into it, which was, this is not my native space. This is not even a woman's native space. Like, the skills that I've built up to this point may translate, but I don't know how to translate them over yet. And so I'm watching and learning, but is my learning curve here maybe lengthier than if it were to seem like a native space for women or people like me? Then potentially yes. And so, I don't want to speak for all women, but for me, that's definitely been an experience that I've wrestled with a bit, pushed through, found areas where I could thrive, and then also definitely noticed areas where there have been more barriers to learning and growing than I would have liked, and had to kind of deal with that as well. So, yeah.
That's so fascinating to me. And you're making me think in telling the stories about your daughters and then you in different domains. And Tom, you've written and talked a lot about this. Learning and mentors, the roles that mentors play in these different phases of life. You don't have to psychoanalyze or take Jess or her family through any of this. But what can you tell us about what role mentors play in different life phases around these transitions, whether the resistance is choosing us or we're choosing it proactively?
Well, I think one really important way to reflect what Jess just said is that you can't date all the boys, you can't date all the girls. And maybe a mentor sees something in you that you don't see in yourself that's actually real. Like a bad mentor is just going to force you, or like a bad dad is just going to force you to do the thing that they love because they loved it, right? But Michael Phelps and Eliud Kipchoge are not physiologically the same. Michael Phelps is uniquely structured for swimming. Eliud Kipchoge is uniquely structured for marathon. Now, they both trained to an incomprehensible level to maximize those gifts, but they had a niche advantage. And so I think niche selection in life is unbelievably important. Parents in particular can help people find those niches, because you can really pick the wrong ones, right? And you can spend your life in the wrong ones. And I don't know, like that worries me. Like I genuinely don't know how much freedom you have. Like the idea that you come to reflect your niche and your niche comes to reflect you. Like, how happy can you make yourself in a place that's wrong for you? And should you be constantly switching out of that place for something that just feels much more like play for you? But is that not challenging enough? How you manage to that like explore, exploit, I think about all the time. I don't have to.
And obviously there's good mentors and bad mentors to guide your little bacterium towards the lump of sugar in the dishes that you put yourself in or find yourself in here. But what about the role that a good mentor can play in helping you navigate either a bad situation that you can't make the best of or a good situation that you can make gooder?
Oh yeah. Think about archetypes. Archetypes are a reason. The king archetype gives people space, right? That's what defines it. The king archetype makes space for the feminine inside themselves and inside society. He's a patron that lets everyone else gives flourish. And so I think like a good mentor and a good coach gives people space. I think specifically, right? Like my sister had a son that was very musically gifted. And in an academic family, she led into that, and she, built him a studio in the basement. And now he could buy and sell the family 10 times over as a result of his success. And most people would assume that the kid going into music, that ain't going to happen. But she creates the space and the circumstances and the garden for him to flourish. That's what I think a good mentor does. And that's what the king archetype has always done.
Jess, how do you think about mentors, both acting as one, because I know you do in a professional capacity all over the place in all sorts of domains, but then also just who, you don't have to reveal any examples of people who have like pulled you along in these places, but mentors in different transitions and different phases of life.
Two things. One is a blog post that I read a while back that's really stuck with me. Seth Godin, his daily blog is she doesn't make the flowers grow. It was kind of the title, and the idea was, they want to have the flowers have to grow themselves. Like they have to want to grow. She just provides, to Tom's point, she just provides the opportunity. She waters, she gives the light. But still the flowers have to do the work of growing themselves. So that's one piece of it where I do think that mentors or sponsors, even in a way, have this ability to create circumstances where people thrive or don't, but their own personal success is still due to whether or not they want to thrive. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is back to the volleyball, something that happened this past weekend at a tournament. My daughter's team played another team that ended up in the final game missing one player that they had in the original game. And they got beat handily in the first game by this full team. And then the team at the end was missed. They were with the player that they were missing. They beat them handily. So it was like an almost reversal, just based on the presence of this one player on the team. And we were having a separate discussion about the coaching and blah, blah, blah. And I asked her, I reflected back to her, I said, did the coaching change from the first game to the last game? Were there different coaches for that team? She said, no. And I said, so what did change? And they said, well, the players changed. I said, oh, so it wasn't the coaching that was good or bad that determined the outcome of the game, because the coaches were the same first game to last game. But something about the team dynamic, something about that missing player, something about how that shifted their ability to put together a win and play against y'all, and like that shifted the dynamic so strongly, that one missing player. And I was like, how can you work toward being that kind of player that lifts your team up? That, so it was just kind of like a separate lesson that we were talking about. But for me, the impact of that was, yes, the coaches matter, but it also, the work is the people who are doing the work, the ones coming together doing the work, maybe the team themselves still has such the opportunity to have such a powerful dynamic on the and the powerful play on the outcome of this that even surpasses the coaching or the mentoring or the sponsoring of that person.
What's the difference between a hero acting alone and heroes acting together, Tom? How do you think about the combinatorial force of not necessarily the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but heroes in isolation and heroes combined?
I think on the first hand, even the individual hero hasn't completed the hero's journey until they come back to the village, right? Mm-hmm. So
even if that's at a tournament and that's collecting the trophy on the stand to bring home, yeah, Go, keep going.
So like our cultural definition of hero is wrong, right? It's that it's someone who goes out, is some, does some Herculean task. Whereas the real meaning of the hero myth is someone that maybe learns something that helps the entire tribe and then comes back and tells them all. So even though it's a singular act of bravery, it only exists within the context of the whole. And then I don't think the hero stuff applies to the collective in any meaningful way, but I think that it was interesting to me that like the God of Self-Help, Jordan Peterson, his first book to me very much was like, you're on your own. And then he went through this medically induced coma for 9 days and a full death and rebirth experience. And at one point it looked like he was going to come out with this total change of philosophy, which I don't think it happened. But in his book, like there was a part that really moved me and almost moved me to tears because it was so close to my own experience that when you're going through that death and rebirth experience, there will be no piece of driftwood that you can hold that is strong enough to maintain your weight. And he says, like, you will lose everything and you will lose the ability to even rely on your own character. And then you will be reliant on the nurses around you. Then you will be reliant on family and you will not be able to do this on your own. So yeah, like the hero's journey is probably an individualist cycle, but maybe at that death and rebirth, you have to be reliant on something else around.
When you think in terms of teams or team sports, Jess, like how do you think about, like, does the teams, when we ignore the coach, is it almost like you have this collection of like heroes and mentors and all those things that are elevating the group together? How do you think of them as a combination?
Let me say this back to you, make sure I understand. If you assume that everybody on the team has their own kind of hero's journey, how do the dynamics of that work together for success?
Yeah. How do they win? How does that elevate the whole group? How is 1 + 1 3 maybe?
Ah. So I the really what we're looking at here, right, is sociology versus psychology, maybe.
Take a second. Take a second.
It's an idea of uh, what are the dynamics of group and how are they different than the dynamics of the individual? What's important about that we need to notice and make space for, and some of that does go back to the individual piece of can we play and execute and move to the level of I have to do less in order for my team to win more, right? Or when are the moments when I have to do more in order for my team to win more? And how do I communicate well with the other people in this group in order to know when I'm doing more and when I'm doing less in order for our team to win more? In the context of a team, that comes down to communication for the most part, and an abundance of communication, different styles of communication, a willingness to make mistakes, and a trust that when you do, the other people in the group are not looking to punish your mistake, but looking to pick up for the slack, which means they also love the win of the team more than they hate the mistake of the individual. And so these dynamics of covering for each other are developed, I think, on top of the skill of the game, and maybe even set as a foundation below the skill of the game. But it's different. It's different, right, than just being able to hit a ball over a net versus the ball's coming at us and it's right in between me and this other player. How do we know whose ball that is? there's a lot that needs to happen before that moment in order to know, intuitively know whose ball that is, and whose responsibility it is to get to that ball. I was listening to a Whoop podcast where they're interviewing Patrick Mahomes' athletic trainer that's been with him for 20 years, maybe forever.
Yeah.
And he was saying that, when Patrick comes in, I actually tell him about the defensive line on the other team. And I tell him about those individual players, and I tell him which one of those are fast, and I tell him which one of those are strong. Because I want him to intuitively know in the game when somebody comes running at me, is he fast or is he strong? Because if he's fast, I need to run directly at him. There's no way I can outrun him. But if he's strong, I need to pull off to the side and get away from him. Because if he gets to me, he's going to tackle me, and I'm not going to be able to make it through. I'm not going to be able to break his tackle. So all of those all those things are learned before that moment that it's needed. And to me, that is probably one of the most important pieces of working within a society, is knowing each other and knowing them well and communicating and building all those little tiny networks ahead of the moment that it's needed.
This interplay between hero and tribe back to hero.
Yeah.
Tom, any other insights inside that relationship? That's so fascinating.
It's you, me, really. What is that made of? How good is that signal? And I think that, can't work out whether this is profound or obvious, but like, how
In the great tradition of self-help, is it profound or obvious?
Maybe I can make it sound more sophisticated than it is. But is it how good that third thing is will define how well you work together. And like, you talk about Patrick Mahomes and his trainer having been working together for that long. Look at teams who've been playing together for that long, is that they have a perfect theory of mind of each other, but Jess knows exactly what Tom's going to do, no matter when he moves his body this way, and it's all unconsciously held. So like, I think that's important. And I guess the so what of that that's why it's so important to be really open with people, so they can get an accurate theory of mind of you as quickly as possible, right? Mm-hmm. If you're all front, they'll never be able to work out what you're thinking. It'll be very hard to work with you. Whereas if these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, these are my weird foibles, people can get a much better read on your theory of mind as long as you're willing to be genuine about what that is.
Yeah. Then you're accurately building that combination, that you and me. Yeah.
Which is why Google said that psychological safety was the number one thing in effective teams, because that basically people knew that if they exposed themselves, they wouldn't get exploited within a professional context, which I wish I could say that was the same in a lot of other places. But sorry, Matt.
No, that was. So I'm thinking back to where we started on this.
Right.
That expectation of creating psychological safety, that expectation of creating not just the 1 + 1 in the personal sense, but the 3, that extra in the space between us. Just take me back to like the society expectation on you. How much of that do you let come in to define the space between us versus how much do you have to go out and define yourself?
Good. In an ideal and perfect world, the things that you let in are the things that you're willing to attach to you, or that are magnetized by your identity of yourself, right? So those things that you let in, if it could be helpful toward being someone, let's say take it back to the CrossFit example. As I started to lift weights, I learned that I loved it. There was a expectation within the world of CrossFit of becoming strong. You could see if you were watching social media, there was a really interesting turn, I would say, that started about 5-7 years ago, where there was a a through line across social media where women were talking about being strong versus being skinny, right?
Yeah.
So it was like we completely flipped this, in some ways, this idea on its head. It was still attached to body image. So there's a whole undercurrent that
This didn't come from Mahomes' coach, right? This isn't part of the fast strong thing.
this is not.
Just clearing his name. Go ahead.
We'll
Keep
break
going.
that line.
We'll break
this
that line.
is just
Okay.
through the development of CrossFit as a sport and the projection of these incredibly strong females on the main stage of CrossFit and ESPN, and like, wow, women can do that with their bodies. That's even a thing. That's even possible. And you started to see this social shift of women chasing strength as opposed to chasing skinny. And so for me, I was pulled along with that to some degree of like, I can be stronger. I want to be stronger. And there was a piece of that I allowed in because it identified with something that was meaningful to me, which was I'd spent my entire life trying to be skinny and not able to, in my mind, successfully fulfill that idea. But, oh, wait a minute, I can be strong. I can be strong. I can chase that. That is something that I can attach to my identity, that I can execute on, that I can fulfill, that does win awards or, whatever it was. There was a time when I was competing where it was meaningful to be strong. And so that piece that I let in, that I pulled into the center of me was truly who I was. And also there was this message from the outside saying that women should be that. So for me, it was kind of this perfect like match in that moment of something that society said versus something that I already wanted to be. And everything that was being taught around the idea of being strong was meaningful to me. So in that way, it was my favorite self, and it was an idea of best self being projected by society. Those two things aligned within me, and it was fine. I had no tension with that for myself. But going back to the prior to that, when all the messages from society were women need to be skinny and this size and blah, 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 and it did not align with me or even there was really no way for me to accomplish that with the body structure that I am. There was always tension between those two things, and I always felt it. Whereas to that point, if I could have released that prior to that moment and focused on fitness and health, which has been a journey even since being strong, right?
Yeah.
Then I could have been more at one and more at peace with who I am, which was always eventually the person, to Tom's point, the future person pulling me forward was the one that wanted to be fit, the one that wanted to be healthy. And I got there eventually, but it was through some tension and then through some excitement and then eventually through fulfillment of the ultimate path.
Tom, how do you see the balance between the tribe and hero Jess in that story? Like, what does it mean when those things do finally line up, when the treasure comes home and like, hey, I can achieve both of these things, and this is the me that I like, and you like me as this too?
I think it's diversity. That one of the interesting ideas was like, if you have a village of 150 people, you have one blacksmith, you have one musician, you have one carpenter, you have one farmer. If you don't fit those niches, you're not going to maximize what you got. 8 billion people connected by the internet. That's a lot of different niches. Like that's a lot of different healthy places that you can occupy and get paid to occupy. And, when Jess is talking, she's like, you can be healthy skinny and you can be healthy strong. They're both healthy and they're both equally valid identities. And one of them, like if you spend the rest of your life trying to be healthy skinny, you'd be miserable. And if a healthy skinny person spent the rest of their life trying to be a CrossFitter, they'd be miserable too. Right. But you can extend that across almost every vertical. Physically, things are more limited, right? I think this is just a more limited range of options for us physically based on our makeup. Mentally, there's probably a limitation on that as well, but it's like you now have more options cognitively because there's more places that you can go cognitively, digitally. And that is a sign of a super healthy system. And a super unhealthy system is like, everybody's got to have this BMI.
Right.
Any system that optimizes for a lack of diversity gets incredibly fragile incredibly quickly.
Oh, that's a great line.
Well, me and my wife went to New Zealand on our honeymoon, and we went hiking for 3 days, and we didn't hear a single bird. We asked why, and the guide said the Brits, always the Brits, introduced goats, the little rodents, into New
Glad this wasn't a personal attack on you, Tom. I got nervous for a second.
Zealand. Get into the Australia, New Zealand, everything's a personal attack on the British. And they killed everything. They killed all the birds. And New Zealand was predominantly a bird-based culture. One species killed everything. And that makes an incredibly fragile ecosystem. There was just one thing.
I want to go back through some of these notes that I made while we were talking, and I'm going to just throw a finger up or whatever and comment on this as we go. But it's just so interesting. We started off just talking about this difference between best self and favorite self, and what society expects of you versus what you enjoy being the most. And inside of that, we're trying to bring these into some form of harmony, into some sort of like ecosystem or structure where we're okay. The power of trauma and transformation, and how the past is your experience as you lived. But Tom, you had this beautiful way of talking about the future that's pulling us towards it. I made a little note. It was really interesting to me that Jess, you explained the barbell that I hold in my hands, while Tom specifically referred to the stick that you beat yourself with. I think those are the same thing. Positive, but I'm pretty sure. We talked about the difference between the many selves that are at war and how that changes over time. I think that connection between, Jess, what you explained is the many selves at war, and Tom, what you explained as in Campbell's sense, like you learn the rules, then you break the rules, then you choose to follow your bliss after this. And we repeat that cycle over and over again. We talked about going into the weight room, both the literal one and the societal one, and the personal weights that we're called to lift, in the young sense, the weights that call us. Tom, you had the line about, and attribute this if you can, the thin line between self-help and self-violence. I think you said that. Do you know who said that?
Yeah, it was my buddy John.
Credit to Tom's buddy John. Because that is a profound line. Wrapping back into Tom's point, Jess, you talked about the current identity as our center of gravity and what's pulling us in to make sense. That idea of the center of gravity and what makes us good and how it pulls us into the middle, because there's the identity inside of that. And that identity is always nested inside of this larger cultural system, this back and forth between the hero and the tribe. And Tom, you made the super important point, and Jess, you illustrated it with the story about the team. The hero goes out to do the great thing, but then has to complete the journey, return back to the tribe. You got to bring the treasure home. And that could mean in a team effort, I do the thing that advances the team's position, that doesn't punish me for going out and doing I didn't pass, but I scored. Okay, great. That still helped the whole team. We could bring the treasure home. And how important that balance is, because that's what shows up. I love this explanation of the formula. 1 + 1 always equaling 3. Not sometimes, but it always equals 3. In a way, maybe it could also equal -1, but it's about that extra thing you don't see is the relationship in between us. I think this is where I'm landing on this. I see this as two things to go all the way back to the top. You need ecosystem diversity. That's in the social construct. That's in the awareness of it. There's a million niches. There's a million things we can fall down. All the rabbit holes in the world in the ecosystem diversity. But then inside of ourselves, we need an ecosystem diversity. That's this desire to have these selves, organize them in a way that's productively moving us forward and becoming that version of our favorite self, even if it's fleeting. Thank you guys so much for having this talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Yeah. The one thing that I want to make sure that I say that I've thought a lot about since writing that post, and the reflections back to me and the interest that people had with it, was how to get from asking the question of what is my best self to who is my favorite self.
Hey.
And one of those questions, I don't know if it's the only question, I doubt it is. One of those questions I think is just asking the opposite of what you're currently doing or asking yourself now. So again, a story. 16-year-old with school right now, it's been tough overall, not just math, many other subjects. Finding the resolution and the motivation to finish. And it occurred to me one day to ask the question, or to at least for a moment stop the idea of she has to graduate in order to be successful. She has to graduate. We have to graduate. She has to graduate. And I asked myself, what if she doesn't graduate? And sitting with that, I realized it wouldn't matter to me if she didn't graduate, as long as she was kind, as long as she was like proud of herself and the things that she was going after, as long as she was finding, to Tom's point, a niche that surprised and delighted and excited her for the future, and was working toward that being inside of a lane where she could express herself in the context of society in a meaningful way. As long as those values were still attached to the person that she was and was becoming and working toward, I didn't care if she graduated from high school. Like in the on the daily, in my heart, like in my like bones, I still struggle with the idea that maybe she doesn't graduate from high school. I still am hopeful that she will. It's a hard one to let go of. But even in the letting go of that, I realized what sifted through and landed was who she was and what was she about. What was she going to give back to the world? As long as those things were still moving in the context of her and her niche and her being as a person, as long as she could rise up out of that, rise through that, come through that with a good sense of who she was and who she wanted to be in the world, and the values of our family were intact through all of this, then I could let go. And that transition from best self to favorite self, I think, is a similar pathway of asking that question of what if I didn't fill in the blank of that best self idea. And once you can get at least to the point of sitting with that for a moment, what values land? What do I still want even if I didn't have that thing? What still matters to me? And if I had done that with my health and fitness journey, what still matters to me even if I'm not skinny? Oh, hey, it matters to me that I'm healthy. What still matters to me? Oh, it matters to me that, I can lift. Like whatever that still would have sifted through and been a part of me for the long run. I think that's an important piece.
The letting go aspect inside of that. Both of you had different things you had to let go of and return to the tribe with. That's the self-reinforcing thing of, again, it's that social ecosystem and that personal ecosystem that when they're complementary, they make us stronger.
Yeah.
Do you guys know the Mahomes Chatham, I never know how to say his name, story from when they're in 7th grade?
Mm-mm. I don't.
So
you do.
Oh, this is wild. So there's a great story. It was, I forget which thing is, I can give you links to it because it's so cool. So like picture 2 7th graders, like from, I think, crosstown. So like not in the same school at this point. And it's literally like, it's a pitching duel. Like they're both pitching and hitting their team to victory in this game. And it's finally like, I think it's Mahomes is pitching to Cheatham. And basically it's like, it's a 14 pitch endeavor, like foul every single time, like finally flies out and both kids just like evil eye stare each other down. And like the coaches and the parents are all like nail biting, like just what did we just see? These kids are way too intense. So then they're both at what's going to become the school team tryout for football. And they're both on the field throwing. And after each toss of the ball, these kids who like clearly should have this rivalry, who's going to get to be the quarterback, every throw, the other one's like, nice one to the other one. Just back and forth. And the coach who's in this interview has this part where like they're at this for hours or whatever. And he's like, both these kids are Division I potential. And I just watched them high five each other and walk off this field. And it's this idea of you have to find your people who are going to make you stronger. Keep them around you, keep lifting them up too. But that's the tribe we have to keep coming back to. You're showing that with your family. Tom, you're showing that in your work and the people you surround yourself. It's a noble pursuit.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for joining us. Like, comment, and hey, subscribe below to Cultish Creative on YouTube if you haven't already. As the good compliance people want me to remind you, Matt Ziegler, that's me, is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of clients of Sunpoint Investments. I hope you've been entertained. I hope you found this useful. I hope you talk to a professional before you try any of this stuff at home. And most of all, I hope you've subscribed. Be nice to each other out there. And don't forget, head over to cultishcreative.com and let's make curiosity a habit together. And I'm out.